Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. I'm Marianne Williamson, for anybody who doesn't know that. And as you might have heard, I'm running for the U.S. House of Representatives from California, District 33. I'm very excited, now that we are nearing the end of the campaign leading up to the primary election. You can really see the arc and the narrative of the campaign. Much of which I'm very proud of and very excited by, because I think we've all had an amazing journey so far. And one of the things that has made the campaign particularly rich are the issues forums that we have had, where we have had experts talking about the kinds of issues that I would be voting on and that I would be standing for in Congress. And one of the issues, of course, that has been a big conversation in this campaign, because it's a big conversation in this community, is about the corruption of our food supply, about GMOs and herbicides and pesticides and so forth. And as most of you are aware, to me, the underlying issue here has to do with the undue influence of money on our politics. That's why I see getting money out of politics as the great moral challenge of our generation. It is the one issue underlying all these others. It's why we can't adequately address climate change because of the oil companies, fossil fuel companies, and it's why we can't address the issues adequately of GMOs or herbicides or pesticides and so forth because of chemical companies, big biotech, agriculture, and so forth. So today we're going to be talking about food, and we have someone that is known as a kind of hero in this area, and that, of course, is Robyn O'Brien. I want to make sure I have the exact specifics right, that she is a former financial and food industry analyst. She's, of course, triggered an allergic reaction in the food industry when she was really one of the first and has remained one of the biggest and most important voices in asking what is in our food, and is not our food itself making us sick? She has helped to lead a food awakening among consumers, corporations, and politicians. Food companies responding to her work include Kraft, Coca-Cola, Burger King, Nestle, Target, and others, so I'm sure that you, like I am, curious what she said to them and how they responded. More than anything else, I want you to please join with me in giving her a very warm welcome. We're very grateful that she's here. Robyn O'Brien. Oh, you got your own mic?
Well, thanks so much, you guys. I listened to that introduction and I kind of have to laugh, because I was raised in Houston, Texas. I went to business school on a full scholarship, and I graduated as the top woman in my class, where I was recruited by Exxon and Enron in the oil and gas industry. I knew early on that wasn't the right fit for me, and I tend to get bored really easily, and I was fascinated by the stock market. And so I went to work as an equity analyst on a team that managed $20 billion in assets, and I was the only woman on the team. So the guys said, "You're going to cover the food industry." And I said, I can't cook. I burn noodles. This probably is not a very good match. They didn't really care. They made me cover the food industry anyway, and so I set about learning these business models. And I absolutely fell in love with that job. I loved it. It was fascinating. We met the management teams, not only from the food industry, but from companies like Goldman Sachs. We met Martha Stewart, eBay, and it was a fascinating time to be involved in the stock market. When my husband and I decided to have kids, it was pretty obvious to him I was type A personality, so I decided to take all of that and channel it into the time we were going to have kids, and we had 4 children in just over 5 years. So at that point, I really wasn't thinking about the food. I didn't want anybody telling me what to eat. And it wasn't until breakfast one day in January 2006 that everything changed. And I was feeding the kids Lego My Eggo waffles and tubes of blue yogurt and scrambled eggs. And I had joked when I met Martha Stewart when she was taking her company public that I couldn't cook. And she was handing out cookbooks and beach towels. And everybody was having her sign these cookbooks she was handing out. And I seriously was so inept at cooking that I had her sign the financial statements. And I kept those in my kitchen. And that morning when I was making the scrambled eggs, I joked, this is about as Martha Stewart as I get. And as our little one's face started to swell shut, I looked at the older 3 kids and I said, what did you put in her face? And they gave me these blank stares, and I went into complete panic, because here I had been trained to do all of these academic things, business school, financial analyst, and all of a sudden I'm looking at this kid and I couldn't even protect her. And I had no idea what was going on, and we raced her to the pediatrician's office. And she starts rattling off all these statistics, and this was back in 2006, about what was going on with the health of these kids and food allergies, and all I could think was, since when? Since when had so many kids become so allergic to food? From 1997 to 2002, there was a doubling of the peanut allergy. At that point in 2006, 1 out of 17 kids under the age of 3 had a food allergy. Today, 1 in 13 children have a food allergy, and the National Association of School Nurses now says 19% of school-aged kids have a food allergy. And that day, a question came into my head that still has not been answered. And that question is, are we allergic to food, or what's been done to it? And all of a sudden, here I was reading these labels, and I didn't want to read the labels. I've been feeding them fluorescent mac and cheese and blue yogurt, and I figured it was totally fine. I mean, somebody had put it on the grocery store shelves. And all of a sudden, I'm reading these labels, and I'm looking at these ingredients, and I knew darn well why they'd put those into the product. I'd studied the business models. It enhances profitability, it drives their margins. You take the real stuff out, you put the fake stuff in, and it helps a company make money. But the question I had never thought to ask when I was sitting on the equity desk, what are all of these things doing in combination, and how much of this now is safe for my kids? And as I started looking at the data on what was happening to these kids with food allergies, I realized it wasn't just food allergies that were hammering our kids. This generation of children has earned the title of Generation RX because 1 in 3 American children now has autism, allergies, ADHD, or asthma. According to the CDC, cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in children under the age of 15. 1 in 10 has asthma, and in the last 2 years, the CDC reports a 30% increase in the rates of autism in American children. Genetics don't change this quickly. And as I was looking at what was happening to the health of the kids, I thought, you know, what else is happening? I knew far too many moms on the sidelines of these soccer fields that had had double mastectomies. What was going on in the big kids too? And that's when I started to realize that according to the President's Cancer Panel, which was a bipartisan panel that was formed under the Bush administration, the report was released under the Obama administration, so this was a nonpartisan issue. 41% of Americans are expected to get cancer in their lifetime. 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women. And all of a sudden, all this data that I'm crunching, all this stuff is swirling in my head, and I'm thinking, I have 4 kids. What are my odds here? And I couldn't unlearn any of this stuff. And all I could think was, what has changed? When we were kids, a PB&J and a carton of milk weren't loaded weapons on a lunchroom table. We didn't have the rates of cancer in our families and our communities that we have today. The cost of cancer, the cost of those drugs is doubling. You have oncologists writing to the New England Journal of Medicine that they're concerned that the cost of cancer care, just cancer, is going to bankrupt the medical system. Well, what about food allergies? There had been a 265% increase in the rate of hospitalizations related to food allergic reactions from 1997 until 2007. And what about diabetes? We hadn't even hit on that one yet. And as I started to look into what was changing in the food supply, it was in the fall of 2006, and I literally was in full-blown research mode. Every single analytical gene in my body had gone off. Everything that I had learned as an equity analyst, I was plowing into how do I protect the health of my child. And I had these Google alerts for headlines on food allergies. And in October of 2006, this headline comes across. The EPA had granted $447,000 to a small university in Michigan to figure out if genetically engineered foods caused an allergic reaction. And I'm thinking, what's a genetically engineered food? I'd never heard of these things. And as I started to look into what a genetically engineered food was, I realized that this chemical company that I had never heard of, I'm punching in the ticker symbol because that's how I worked, MON, outflew this multi-billion-dollar chemical company. And I can remember sitting at the table and looking across at my husband and saying, have you ever heard of this company, Monsanto? And he says, no. And I said, they have got something in everything in the kitchen, everything in our fridge and everything in our cabinet. How do we not know about this company? And I kind of went into this mode where I was like, maybe it's just me. I mean, we did have 4 kids in 5 years, and maybe I just missed this. And as I really started to look into what a genetically engineered ingredient was, I thought, this is a brilliant business model. But if this is the food industry, then why, as a food industry analyst, did we never once meet with these companies? The chemical industry analysts met with them. And it was because the chemical industry, whose job it is to sell chemicals, realized that they could genetically engineer a soybean to withstand increasing doses of their chemicals. And it makes a ton of sense as a business model. It drives profitability. Not only does it help the farmers, apparently, because it enables them to have more of these things growing in their field, but at the same time, it was allowing an increased dosage of these chemical weed killers. So they literally had genetically engineered the crop to be Roundup ready so that they could sell more of their chemical Roundup. It's a brilliant business model. At the same time, that Roundup weed killer that we have in those bottles that we're told not to keep under our kitchen sink, that we're told to keep out of kids' way because of the harm that it could cause, that's what they were spraying on our food. And so I wanted to see what happened with the use of the chemicals. That red line was the introduction of genetically engineered crops. That uptick was the increase of the chemicals that were applied to them. In the first 13 years of the introduction of genetically engineered foods into our food supply, there was a 527 million pound increase in the application of these chemicals. And I thought, how did this even happen? And how in the world am I going to talk about this in a way that sounds coherent and balanced? Nobody was talking about it. I felt like people were going to look at me like I had 3 heads if I tried to talk about it. And so I thought, this is a brilliant business model, but how in the world do you introduce this into the food supply without telling an entire country when 60% of the world's population was informed that it was happening? Around the world, 60% of the world was told that these ingredients were introduced into their food so that they could make an informed choice when it came to feeding their families. So we had 2 kinds that were introduced. One was that Roundup Ready kind that allowed them to soak more of that Roundup over the field. The other was a genetically engineered corn. And again, it sort of started here. There was an awareness in California of what the spraying of insecticides was doing to crops and to the environment. And so scientists using this new technology were able to genetically engineer that insecticidal protein into the seed of the corn so that as the corn plant grows, it can release its own insecticide. I'm reading those labels and I'm thinking, how do you wash that off? At the same time, the EPA recognized that that corn was so fundamentally different to anything that had existed before that they decided that it had to be regulated by the EPA as a pesticide. So if given the choice, you could have corn that our grandmothers ate that had been in our food supply for decades, or you could have one regulated by the EPA as a pesticide. And somewhere along the way, the FDA, based on industry-funded research, decided that these 2 things were substantially equivalent. The substantial difference mandated that the EPA regulate that thing as a pesticide, and then on top of that, the United States Patent and Trademark Office patented that new corn for its novelty in order to protect the profitability, the unique characteristics of it, and enhance the profitability of the companies that were producing it. And I mean, it makes sense. You patent technologies, you patent operating systems. We've seen this before. Microsoft's operating system, have you ever tried to use any of those pieces by themselves? They don't work. You have to have the whole bundled package together. That's what Monsanto was able to introduce, this genetically engineered seed that required certain chemicals in order for it to grow, and it is a brilliant business model. They sold more of their chemicals, they could patent that thing, license it, charge royalty fees, trait fees, and suddenly their revenue model had a whole bunch of different lines in it that didn't exist before. But I thought about this and I thought, is this a food system or is this a chemical system? And if we were given the choice, which would we choose? And I can remember at one point going to my dad. He was a businessman and he was out visiting us in Colorado, and I said, I can't unlearn this. What am I supposed to do? And he said, you're supposed to do nothing. And I know that that was born out of his concern for protecting his own child. But the day he said that, it was as if somebody had taken one of my lungs out. And I looked at these 4 little kids and I thought, I cannot unlearn this. And I don't know what people are going to say, but I have to try to do something. And I realized as an analyst that correlation was not causation. Just because the two things happened to coexist, that from 1997 until 2007, there was a 265% increase in the rate of hospitalizations related to food allergic reactions. A food allergic reaction is when your body sees food proteins as foreign. And just because that is perfectly correlated to the introduction of foreign proteins in our food supply does not necessarily mean that that is the cause. However, the correlation was so strong that I felt it merited investigation. And so I began to do some investigation. I wanted to see, what was going on around the world, these countries that don't allow genetically engineered ingredients, these countries that label genetically engineered ingredients. And it wasn't just genetically engineered ingredients. I was quickly realizing that companies like Kraft and Coca-Cola and Walmart formulate their products differently for eaters overseas. So they're still eating mac and cheese and drinking Cokes and Skittles and M&Ms, but they just don't have the genetically engineered ingredients and all the chemicals that are soaked on those things. They don't have artificial dyes. They don't have artificial growth hormones. I quickly learned that the United States was the only developed country in the world that allowed for an artificial growth hormone to be pumped into our dairy cows. And again, as an analyst, it made sense. You're going to pump these cows full of this artificial growth hormone. It's going to help them make more milk. Hopefully that's going to lower the cost of milk production, get milk to people in cheaper loads. As a business model, yes, technically I could analyze that. The reason every other developed country around the world rejected that artificial growth hormone was because when it was injected into the cows, it made the animals so sick with mastitis, ovarian cysts, all kinds of skin disorders that it required an increased drug and antibiotic use on those animals. And they thought, we just don't want that in the food supply. And they kept it out. But we introduced it in the US, and one of the concerns with the introduction of that growth hormone was that it also elevated a hormone level linked to cancer. And when I learned that, I had to step away from the work. Because there was a night when I was putting our littlest down where all I could think was, how many of these sippy cups have I filled with this milk? And how many bowls of cereal have I poured this on for my husband? Not knowing about the concern around this artificial growth hormone. And I came downstairs the next day, and I got the kids all around the table, and I said, you know how Mom has learned some pretty rough stuff about what's happening to our food, and how we allow all these ingredients in our food that other countries don't allow, and how our own American companies make their products differently for eaters in other countries? I said, I'm going to have to do something about it. And they were so little, and one of the boys looked up and he said, Mom, how many people are on your team? And I said, well, it's you 4 and Daddy. And he said, Mom, you need a bigger team. And it was one of those moments where you just knew he was absolutely right. And people were suggesting that I reach out to Erin Brockovich. And I was a mother of 4, and I thought, again, how do I present this in a really balanced manner? But I'm also super type A, so I had to try. And I spent a ridiculously amount of time trying to craft this 4-sentence email to Erin. And I don't know if I ever expected her to reply. But when she did, I was sitting across the table from my husband. It was late at night. And she said, I'm so glad someone's finally taking this on. When my brother was 37 years old, he died from a food allergic reaction. It still gives me the chills. In that moment, I thought, what if one person really can make a difference? But I wasn't sure that it had to be me. And I was really struggling with it. I didn't have the support of my family. I had the support of my husband, thank goodness. But it was a real challenge for the family that I was raised in Texas. And I reconnected with an old college friend who had been through a lot himself. And I said, you know, Lou, who am I to do this? And he said, Rob, I'm going to send you a quote. And he sent me this quote from this woman named Marianne Williamson. And it was about who are you not to? That our playing small does not serve the world. And I truly believe that each one of us has been given a very unique set of skills and talents to leverage. And I had this combination in me. And I couldn't unlearn what I had learned. And I realized I had to do something. And I began to move forward. And people were suggesting that I reach out to Bobby Kennedy. He had been an attorney that had challenged Monsanto. He also had children that were allergic and asthmatic. One of the concerns that I had was that his allergist had invented patents for Monsanto, and he did not know this. So I thought, how do I present this information to this man? And again, went totally type A and pulled together this presentation, and I sent it off. And I said, you know, I'll be with my family. I'll be back April 2nd. And I don't really know if I expected him to reply. We walked in the door April 2nd, the phone rings, and it's his chief of staff. I took all 4 kids, threw them in the backyard, locked the door. They had me on speakerphone, and to this day, I still don't know who was in the room that day. And they just kept saying, this is an unbelievable story. This is unbelievable. And he invited me to be on his radio show, and the team started to grow. And that's when I started to realize that courage is contagious, and one person really can make a difference. So as I started to speak out about this, the food industry had an allergic reaction to me. A big one. I was connecting a lot of dots that they didn't want connected. I spoke about it from a business analytical background. And I was approached by somebody who, at the time, I didn't know who he was. And it turned out he was the head of an ad agency, of a global ad agency. And he said, you know, I have this small online TV show, I want you to come on. It's called Fearless TV. And I was like, you're crazy. Your clients are Kraft, Burger King, Coca-Cola, and Domino's. How are you going to have me on this TV show? And he said, no, I got it. I'm going to have you on the show. 2 days before we're supposed to tape the show, he emails, he's like, I screwed up. I can't have you on the show. And I was like, I knew that was going to happen. Don't worry about it. And then 2 days later, the New York Times ran a story that he had resigned. And I emailed him and I said, I don't know what this story is yet, but something in me feels fiercely proud. And he said, wait till you hear the story. So we got together a couple days later, and he shared how Kraft and Burger King had contacted the agency and said, if he has Robyn on that show, we're pulling the accounts. Suddenly, it wasn't just my family I was responsible for. I realized that this was a lot bigger than all of us, and we were going to need each other. And so, you know, I quickly earned this name, Foods Aaron Brockovich, from places like Bloomberg and the New York Times, but I was called a lot of other names. And as I really started to realize, you know, the thing I really had the hardest time was this double standard of our own American companies, that they were making their products differently overseas, but not here. And I thought, you know, why aren't they placing the same value on the life of an American family that they are on the life of other families? And if every family in the UK has access to clean and safe food, why isn't every family at every socioeconomic level here in the United States getting that same access? That injustice was something I could not shake. And I wanted to know, what was the impact? Again, correlation is not causation, but when I started looking at data from the Office of Economic Development, things that were comparing global numbers, the United States spends 2.5 times more on average than our global trading partners on healthcare and disease management, almost $9,000 a person. In places like the UK, it's about $3,500 a person. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, you know, this sickness sells. And how can we be our best as a country competing in the global marketplace if this much of our money is getting tied up managing disease? And as I really started to look at that, I realized that we spend 18 cents of every dollar in our economy is on healthcare and disease management, which means it's not going into productivity, it's not going into innovation, it's not going into education, it's not going into economic development. And I thought, how, again, as a country, can we economically put our best foot forward if our money and all of our core resources are getting tied up managing disease? We needed a better system. Again, I come from a super conservative family, so I was trying to pull data that was coming from pretty conservative sources, and one of the things that I wanted to look into was life expectancy at birth. The CIA actually ranks it. And at the time when I was first pulling the data, you know, it's in me, this fierce patriotic American thing where I wanted us to be at the top of the list, you know? So I'm scrolling down this list of all these countries and I'm like, yeah, we're gonna be like in the top 10 or something, you know, and you're scrolling down, down, and down. And right now they estimate that we're at 42nd place, just ahead of countries like Bahrain. You know, and again, I'm thinking like, this is challenging more than how I'm feeding my family here. This is challenging something a lot bigger. But at the same time, at the core, I realized that these founding principles that our country was founded on, these pioneering spirits of when we saw an injustice or we wanted to create a better way, that's what we did. And so I thought, you know, we need a new prototype. I mean, the fax machine was pretty awesome when it came out. And now we have email and hardly anyone uses it. And it's the same thing with the Betamax. You have these new technologies that you think are pretty awesome at the time, and then things advance, we get smarter, and we create better ways. And I found myself having to rethink this word organic. You know, it was an adjective, quite honestly, that totally annoyed me because it cost so much. And I didn't really want to have to justify it. You know, we had 4 kids, my husband's in finance. I didn't really want to have that fight over the kitchen table of why we needed to pay more for groceries. But when I really started to look into why organic food was so much more, I realized that all of us, as a big national family, for our big national dinner budget, we all pay in our taxes, and these resources go into this big dinner budget. And all those resources that we pay in, all of those are going to support this chemically intensive operating system with these genetically engineered ingredients and all the chemicals that are applied to them. And our resources are not going to the organic farmers, who by law are not allowed to use genetically engineered ingredients and the chemicals that are applied to them. They're then charged fees to label those things and fees to prove that they're safe. So the economic structure there is totally unequal. And I thought, as a big family, if we had a choice, would we choose it? Or would we choose at the very least an equilibrium so that we could just have the freedom to choose which one we wanted regardless of price? And as I quickly realized, organic meant it's produced without all of these ingredients: artificial growth hormones that aren't used in other countries, artificial dyes that aren't used in kids' foods around the world, genetically engineered ingredients, and these synthetic toxic pesticides that stick around that other countries thought, you know, we don't know what the long-term impact of all of those applications might be. And so when all of these things were introduced into our food supply, what our grandparents called food, we suddenly had to give the adjective organic. And it made me rethink what that was really actually all about. And it also made me realize that I'm going to be doing this until I have a gray ponytail, because that economic discrepancy on the farm is fundamentally what has to change so that clean and safe food is affordable to all Americans. This economic discrepancy we have in our food system right now today, to me, is one of the greatest injustices of our times. I truly believe this is one of the greatest human rights issues of our time. Regardless of income, regardless of zip code, regardless of ethnicity, we should have access to clean and safe food as Americans. That is in the best interest of our economy. It's in the best interest of our families, and that is in the best interest of our country. So as I was looking at where we were failing at the federal level with this big national family dinner budget we have, I realized the capital markets were responding. Venture capitalists were recognizing that consumers wanted a new operating system. They just wanted food without the junk in it. They wanted food that we'd been raised on. They wanted food that other countries were eating. They wanted food that was free from artificial ingredients, GMOs, artificial dyes. So venture capitalists started betting on it, private equity groups started betting on it, and Wall Street started seeing the return. Annie's is a little company that makes mac and cheese without the junk, started by a mom. They went public in March of 2012. When they did, that stock saw the biggest opening day gain of any IPO in any industry in almost a year, which means that of all the technologies that Wall Street saw that year, those guys got the most excited about a mold of mac and cheese that didn't contain any junk. And I thought, that is reason to hope. We need a new operating system. We need one for 21st century families, because the one we've inherited doesn't work anymore. Companies are responding, and the ones that are seeing stock market reward and returns. Chipotle has announced that they're going to try to dump the junk. They realize they can't be perfect. The whole point here is we've got to focus on progress, not perfection, and that's what they're doing. When they make these announcements quarter after quarter after quarter, their stock goes up because the market recognizes that this is a changing face of a 21st century family. Nobody would have chosen autism or cancer or life-threatening food allergies. Nobody chooses that. And that is no more of a fad than this demand for clean food. This is not a trend. It is simply a fundamental shift that we're all going through because of the health of our families. WhiteWave is another company that's seen extraordinary returns, 17 quarters in a row of beating their earnings and record growth, because they recognize that milk is the #1 food allergy in the country, according to CNN and the Wall Street Journal. And so they just offer a diverse product offering, recognizing that, yeah, maybe we all grew up with cow's milk in our fridge, but we're not like that anymore. We've got almond milk and cashew milk and soy milk and rice milk, and we need that portfolio of products. And as they've introduced it, they've seen incredible return for their shareholders. And I kind of wanted to get at two that were the fundamental operating systems. Monsanto's share price is absolutely the leading indicator of what a chemically intensive operating system can do. And then there was this company, Hain Celestial, which has done a really good job of acquiring a lot of these smaller companies and sort of consolidating this space. And they're not perfect, but they're doing a really good job of capturing what's happening with the consumer and meeting her where she stands in the grocery store with a kid with diabetes and a kid with allergies, or maybe a little one with autism, or maybe a parent with cancer. And if you look at both of these two stocks, both of them are outperforming the S&P 500, which makes sense because we need food. That demand's not going away. But that top one is Hain. The growth opportunities in this space are absolutely enormous. And so I thought, how are we capitalizing on this as a country? From 2013 to 2018, the demand for organic food is expected to grow 14%. It's why we're starting to see companies like Walmart get in the game. They recognize that it's not a trend. This is where the consumer is going. The problem is that only 1% of US farmland is organic. So we have this massive demand and this massive growth, and we are outsourcing that entire opportunity to China. That doesn't serve American farmers, that doesn't serve American families, that does not serve the American economy. And again, it is going to require a fundamental shift in policy to bring that opportunity back home. So what can we do? Thankfully, there's a lot that we can do. If anybody would have suggested I'd be up here talking about this, I would have said they were totally nuts. But I think it speaks to how each one of us has something that we're uniquely good at. I can't do everything, but I can do what I have the talents to do. And so can absolutely everybody in this room. And as we begin to take these steps and focus on progress, not perfection, we create a fundamental change in the marketplace. And these companies are listening. Companies like Nestle are listening. Companies like Safeway. And they will pull me aside and they will say, I have a son with autism. And that's when you realize all of us, It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what party you're with. It doesn't matter where you are socioeconomically. If someone you love gets cancer or autism, we all hurt the same way. And so we have an opportunity right now to look back and point fingers and blame, but I couldn't function that way. And as I came through this myself, I went through anger and sadness and grief and what felt like just destruction. And I realized at the bottom of all of that, why I felt all of those things and all of that hurt was because I loved so much. I loved my family and I loved my country. And I realized that that was a rocket fuel that was more powerful than any of their greed. And that is what we tap into. And that is what we have to see this through. So the first thing I think we get these companies to do is standardize. They're already making their products differently overseas. They're already doing it. We're not asking them to reinvent the wheel. We're simply saying, bring those same clean products home so that clean and safe food is affordable to all Americans. We can all do one thing, pick one thing. If it's high fructose corn syrup that you want out, get it out. If it's artificial dyes, you want to do one thing, kick it out. With me, that blue yogurt, my kids were hooked. I was totally afraid there was going to be mutiny at the kitchen table if I tried to get rid of it. I put white yogurt on the table. They were like, it's white. I'm like, it's white, and we started with sprinkles and we put M&Ms. We went in baby steps until we wean them off of all of these artificial ingredients. And again, it's focusing on progress, not perfection. And I think one of the most important things we can do is to find a friend. I can't emphasize enough how important that is. Because food is so much more than just food. It is family, it is economic, it is loaded, it is an injustice. And there are all kinds of emotions that tie into that. And if you can come at it from this place where it's truly a gift that you're giving people that you love with a friend, it is so much easier for someone to receive it. So over the last 8 years, I found a lot of friends. And in the first 8 years of this work, a lot of my focus was on the consumer movement. Last week, I was in New York speaking at Bloomberg, and I realized that I can go back to Wall Street now and say, okay, we've got a consumer shift happening. We need a capital shift happening. We need to finance a smarter food system. We need to finance a food system that makes this affordable to all Americans. Because once we get the money in it, politicians follow the money. And then we'll have policy change. But the reason I'm here today is for two reasons. One is from that quote. I could not believe it when Marianne's team reached out. I would not have had the courage to do what I do if it had not been for that quote. Who are you not to do this? I had it memorized. And every moment where I felt weak, I went to that quote and reminded myself that we have these strengths and we have these talents. But I also realized that we need leaders in Congress that fundamentally understand this issue, not in a superficial way, but they fundamentally understand the enormity of this issue. And we will need people in the halls of Congress when this tsunami hits, because it's going to hit. The cancer rates are too high, the autism rates are too high, and we are having a food awakening in this country right now today. And we will need leaders in Washington, D.C. that we can trust, who will lead on this issue, because I truly believe it is one of the greatest issues of our time. So you're here today. There's something that brought you here today. I don't know if it's a little one or an older one, or if it's you. But you're here for a reason. And I look at this room and I think about the collection of talents and energy and passion, and you leverage that with what you're good at, and we will create extraordinary change. So that when our kids ask, what did you do when you learned about all of this? We'll say we built a better food system. It starts with us. So thank you, all of you guys, for being here today. Thank you, Marianne, for running It takes extraordinary courage to step forward, but courage is so contagious. And as we do, as each one of you do, it will inspire somebody else to do the same. So thank you so much.
Robyn O'Brien. Don't leave. Don't leave. You know, I was already a big fan of Robyn O'Brien's before today, but hearing her speak, which I had never done before, that was really one of the best talks I ever heard. One of the best talks I ever heard, and so many of the things that she said were so real, obviously, for all of us. But I felt when she was talking about how some things you can't unlearn, and it really reminded me of why I'm running for Congress, because so much of what Robyn has said that is genuinely heartbreaking and genuinely sickening, I know for myself and for a lot of us here, we learned this is what's happening in the food, this is what's happening in the military, this is what's happening in the schools. This is what's happening in the economy. And it's so many ways in which the exact same pattern is playing itself out. And it's interesting with Robyn, and we're both from Texas, by the way, but one of the things that Robyn was saying, what she said to her father, "What should I do?" He said, "You do nothing." If I said that to my father, he would have said, "You do something." And I think that she and I both heard what everybody here has heard. We must do something. And one of the things that Robyn also said was, she said repeatedly, it's a brilliant business model. And that is the corruption in the operating system. That right there, when she said we need a new operating system. A country should not be run. You know, some people say it's a business. The point is, no, it's not. It is not. You know, when she said it's a brilliant business model, she kept saying, I understand if you just look at it within the purview of a business model, wow, this is how to increase profits. This is how to increase profits. But that which does not take ethics into account, which does not take conscience into account, is sociopathic. And that's been the argument that we've been talking about for months, that we have a sociopathic economy. It's sociopathic to put, you know, like when she was talking about the human growth hormone in the milk. You know, you look at the statistics on cancer, and you look at the statistics on autism, and you look at the statistics on allergies, and then you go, why are we doing this? Because of the money? I remember a girlfriend of mine in Florida, a few months ago, I was visiting her house, and she told me she'd recently been to Italy, and some friends had asked her before she went, bring me back pasta. And she showed me the pasta from Italy, and then the pasta here, and she talked about all the chemicals, and she showed me all the chemicals in the pasta that was produced here versus the absence of chemicals in the pasta from Italy, which is why the body's reaction is so different. So I think, you know, one of the things that is very central in my thinking is the idea that in every issue, in food, Robyn O'Brien is an example. It's not like the solutions do not exist. It's not like we don't have the geniuses already thinking it through. Not only does Robyn O'Brien exist, like, you know, we talk sometimes, let's envision the country that we want. Let's envision the government that we want. Somebody said the other day that they had asked Muhammad Yunus, why don't we have a better Congress? He said, you haven't imagined the Congress you want. Let's imagine a world in which a Robyn O'Brien would be head of the Food and Drug Administration. Right now, as we know, the former vice president of Monsanto is now a deputy food czar. And that's because of the money in politics, that underlying issue. And you know, when Robyn was saying they follow the money, yeah, they do follow the money, but we also need to make it to the point where they're not following the money, they're following the American people. That's where we need to get it. In addition, of course, to recognizing and showing that all of this is profitable because of the food awakening that Robyn is speaking of. So I'm so grateful to you, Robyn, and I know that you saw how very appreciated you are here. And I hope one of the things I've talked about in the campaign is that should I have the honor and the privilege of becoming your congresswoman, I would indeed, in all the ways that Robyn said, I would be I would seek to be a leader on this issue. I would seek to educate my colleagues on the dangers of GMOs, on what's happening in the food supply, to have congressional hearings, and nothing would make me happier. And I promise you that I will do everything I possibly can to make this happen. Should I have that job, I see congressional hearings where Robyn O'Brien is speaking. Have you spoken at a congressional hearing yet? Well, that's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. So what we're going to do now is, there are going to be 4 of us up here. I'm going to ask Stuart Fishbein to come up here from the Sanctuary, and Aaron Glassman from Golden Mean Natural Foods Cafe. They're going to join us, and the 4 of us are going to be up here, and now the conversation can include all of you, and you can ask any questions that you want to, and among the 4 of us, we will be able to, so you have a doctor here, you have a natural foods restaurateur here, you have Robyn, and you have myself. So in terms of the issue, in terms of the campaign and how that relates to the issue, in terms of medicine, in terms of natural food and restaurants and business. So this is an opportunity for all of us to talk together. And please begin. I guess we have somebody who's with a, yes we do, with a microphone over there. So let's get started. Say your name and...
Hi, I'm Melanie Matthews, and I was very impressed with the speech that you gave. I am one of the many people in this city that do petitions, and about 2 years ago we had a GMO petition that was supposed to make the company put on the labels that the food was genetically engineered. Unfortunately, the people did not, we got enough signatures to get it on the ballot, but unfortunately the people did not vote it. There was a commercial that ran counter to this measure, and I didn't see any commercial to counter the commercial. So, being that that died in the water, is there a new process, a new bill being introduced? 'Cause we petitioners, we're ready. We're ready to go out there and get signatures again. Is there another initiative on the ballot to address this again? And how are we going to keep this one from dying like the other bill died 2 years ago?
Okay, so the money that we're up against right now is fierce. And we were outspent in California, we were outspent in Washington State. There's an initiative in Oregon where we know we're going to be outspent. They cannot outspend our hearts. They cannot outspend our hearts. And policy will follow us. And the fastest way through is not going to be through legislation. It's going to be through the marketplace. It's going to be connecting with these companies. If you want to petition somebody, petition Nestle. If you want to petition someone, petition General Mills, because they're already scrambling. I've been a lightning rod in this space, and I hear from these farmers. And they're terrified. They don't want their names used when I give these presentations, but they say we are pouring record amount of chemicals on our soil. And their legacy is in that land, and these are 5th-generation farmers, and they don't want to be the ones that that farm goes down on. And they're willing to make that change, but they need to see the movement in the marketplace. So that would be my advice. You know, we can continue to support these labeling initiatives. They make a lot of noise. It gets a lot of press. It educates consumers. You know, I knew with California 2 years ago, it would be an opportunity to educate the country on what a GMO actually was, and it did. You guys did an amazing job with that. It brought it to the national stage in a way that had never happened before. But the fastest way through is going to be through the marketplace. And when I get in front of these companies like Nestle or Coca-Cola or Pepsi, that's exactly what I tell them. Why do you continue to carry the dirty water of the chemical companies? Let that ship go down. You don't need to. Stand with the consumer. The landscape in front of us is wide open. They can be part of that change. And Nestle, if they were to put something on a box top that kicked back to these farmers that helped them convert from this chemically intensive system to organic, we could change that pretty quickly in a year or two as a country, and it wouldn't even require policy. We simply drive it through the marketplace. So that would be my advice right now, because the system has been captured. There's a term in finance called capture the regulator. These guys have done it too, and that's why we need people like Marianne in Congress, because that's the system. That stronghold is what has to be broken.
There's a wait bill going to the state Senate floor in the next week.
Now.
Yeah, maybe this week. So
Tell us what the bill is. Somebody tell us exactly what the bill is. And what's it called? Oh, so labeling here in California. Of course, there's a bill in Congress that they're trying to pass that would actually forbid states from passing labeling laws. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a Kansas, right. Eleanor, can you look that up for me? Yeah.
Hi, I have two quick questions. First of all, I have to disclose I'm a farm girl from Illinois, so this is deep, deep, deep to my heart. Two quick questions, one about actual farming and one about the FDA. This thing goes all the way down to the 4-H level. I mean, they're really in deep with Dow and Monsanto, even teaching the little kids. Is there any way to, I don't know, combat that? I don't know how to deal with that process. And the second thing is, as far as the FDA goes, Food and Drug Administration, it seems like they let certain things pass through, like high fructose corn syrup over here, and then all the diabetes meds over here. Is there a way to break up the Food and Drug Administration? I would really like to see that happening. It seems like a mafia chokehold. So those are my two quick questions.
You don't want to think it's a conspiracy theory, but we are the only country that has the Food and the Drug Administration neatly housed under one umbrella. And when we were trying to get the dyes out of the food, we realized that the dyes were in the medicine for kids too. So it created kind of this conflict of interest where how could you address one and not the other? So most countries, you're right, they don't have the Food Administration neatly tucked under the Drug Administration too. It's definitely a problem. I think the issue that you raise about farmers, you have to kind of step back a little bit, and I don't know how long your family's been doing this. I'm actually named after a farmer, and I look at the 5 generations, 6 generations that a lot of families have been farming, and this is just a 20-year blip. You know, it's an experiment we tried, and this iteration of these technologies and this design isn't working. And the farmers know that. And so again, I think it's why we as consumers need to make a lot of noise and really emphasize that this is not a Whole Foods trend. This is the American public waking up. And the reason we're waking up, we don't want to wake up, but cancer is waking us up, and autism and diabetes are waking us up. And the farmers are being hit by this too. I was invited to go out to Mount Pleasant, Iowa, where Vilsack is from, and do this farm tour. And I mean, everybody thought I was crazy when I was going, you know. We all got there, we're staring at each other, nobody knew what to say to each other, you know. We went around on between these 8 little towns, and every field was very neatly labeled with Monsanto and Dow and Syngenta and the signs at each corn row, you know. And I thought, they're labeling it in the field. And if you go into Monsanto's SEC filing, their financial reports, they state in their financial reports that they cannot be accountable to those ingredients through the food system. And I thought about that. I'm like, can you imagine if Intel did that? Intel's so proud of Intel Inside, and they're proud to tell us that those ingredients, those products are inside. And they'll see it all the way through, whatever computer it goes into, whatever Best Buy it goes into, whatever box it goes into. Monsanto does the exact opposite. They totally retreat. And they're willing to label it in the field for the farmer, but not beyond that. And I think, you know, one of the things is where I wish I had a legal background. There's a technology stewardship agreement that the farmers are obligated to sign if they're going to use these new seeds, this new operating system. And that stewardship agreement, as they agree to use the seeds, they have to also agree to use that whole suite of chemicals. As a business analyst, I'm like, wow, you can really book those revenues. You got some real vision into, you know, what the future earnings are going to look like. And I think probably, again, what needs to happen is have these kinds of conversations in Iowa and in Illinois. And I think just as consumers started to wake up about this and you were a little bit afraid and you're kind of in the closet, like, I'm eating organic, but I'm not going to tell anybody because I don't want people to look at me like I'm weird, farmers are going through that right now. And I think to create this safe place for them to have the dialogue is really critical. And again, to have the Nestle's of the world and these big companies say, you know what, we see this shift happening, and we want to source our organic food supply here in the United States, not in Romania and not in China, and to offer, again, this economic opportunity, especially to farm families like yours.
I want to say a couple of things about your question, about Robyn's answer also. First of all, about the Food and Drug Administration. We have with the FDA, very similar to the Environmental Protection Agency, agencies that were set up as protective agencies. They were set up to protect the American people. They were set up to protect the American people against any overreach that would adversely affect us. They have instead, because of the corruption in the system, due to the money that they are able to pour into these systems, these very agencies have become, as often as not, and perhaps more than not, advocates for the very forces that we were raised to believe they would protect us from. And that's why something like EPA, or that's why you hear stories all the time of someone from the EPA or someone from the FDA, much like you yourself said, who are told by their superior to give one official answer. Oh, I know, Robyn's story was how somebody from Nestle or Kraft would come to you after the meeting and say, my son has an allergy or my daughter is autistic. You also hear someone from the EPA, Lance Simmons, tells a story about fracking, and the EPA tells somebody their land is safe, and then later the EPA official actually visits the person's house to say, well, I was told I had to tell you that. But between you and me, it is not safe. So that's number one. Also, something else that Robyn said that I think is very important is that the current system is the aberration. And that's not only in the area of food. It's in the area of all of this. And I think that that's so important. You know, Robyn was talking about being a patriot. You know, and I've said throughout this campaign, I'm not radical. American democracy is a radical idea. But we're the ones standing up for traditional American values here. What could be more of a traditional American value than that we feed our children safe food? And what could be more a traditional American value than that we stand up for a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people? And that gives me great hope. That's why we talk about the historical perspective so much on this campaign, because I think when you have that perspective, you realize, no, things have just we've taken a detour into some dark areas here, but that is the blip. We were on a pretty decent highway until then. You know, in most areas, and certainly in food, and we just have to get back on the highway. One more thing I want to add to that. These are not conservative or liberal issues. These are not right-left issues. I don't care what your political persuasion, you want your children to be safe.
I'll follow on that too. You know, as I was really trying to figure out a way to articulate this message to my very conservative family, and the issue around personal responsibility, I thought, how in the world can you take personal responsibility for your children if you don't know what is in the food? And one of the most conservative things that anyone could be doing is protecting their health so that they don't have to go into a system that is built to manage disease. And again, health is patriotic. It is not partisan.
It's independent. That whole issue of personal responsibility. You know, Eisenhower said the American mind at its best is both liberal and conservative. The high-minded conservative value stresses individual responsibility. The high-minded liberal value stresses public responsibility. The conscious mind stresses both. Yeah, Eleanor, you want to talk about that bill? You found that information?
We got the information on this, the federal bill introduced in Congress, and it would be making sure that the federal government would be in charge of the labeling of foods with genetically modified ingredients. It's an effort by the chemical companies to stop the labeling movements that are happening on a state-by-state level, and it would be controlled then by the federal government would control it all.
Which is easier for them to control.
It's easier. Then all they have to do is control the federal bill, which they're well on their way to doing. They're calling the bill the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act. So do not be fooled. And Marianne mentioned when she was speaking that the executives from the chemical companies end up in high-level positions in the federal government. And in fact, it's Michael Taylor, who was an executive in Monsanto Chemical Company, is now in the FDA and his job is, wait for it, he's in charge of food safety.
Yeah, and you see this also, like we were talking about before, this is a pattern. This is in food and in every other area. The gentleman who is now head of the FCC, who is leading the assault on net neutrality, is a former telecommunications executive. Rotten to the core. We need to fix that.
I have a quick question. I respected and really appreciated everything you said, but what do you say to someone who's poor about the fact that buying organic food is more expensive than the crap that's on store shelves now?
As I came into the economic discrepancy for organic food, that injustice, that fundamental human injustice, that's when I realized this was a human right issue, especially when you consider that cheap box of mac and cheese, that Kraft mac and cheese in the UK doesn't have the junk. Why are they doing that to our own people? That is a fundamental violation of a human right. And it's why I knew I would be doing this for a long time, more than just on this kind of top level stuff. I spent the first 100 days of this year working with 2 low-income families that were on food stamps. Both the mothers were over 350 pounds because I didn't want to assume that I knew anything about how to address this. And spent those 100 days learning about their food choices, why they were making their food choices. Some of it's economic, some of it's financial, some of it's emotional, and to try to help navigate the grocery store, a regular grocery store, with a family that was on a budget. And it's a fascinating challenge, and again, it's something that our country fundamentally has wrong right now.
Can it even be done?
I think what I focused on with them was that, you know, if you were going to buy this box of fluorescent mac and cheese, you don't need to use that fluorescent powder that's linked to ADHD and hyperactivity. And then if you don't have the ADHD and hyperactivity, you don't need the meds that go with it. And at the same time that they're buying all this cheap food, they're also in the Medicare, Medicaid system using all of these medications. So it's just a double whammy. It's hitting our economy twice. And so, you know, as we were able, again, you have to give people permission to not make the perfect the enemy of the good, to focus on progress, not perfection. That was hard for me to do. I thought, you know, if I can't do everything, I'm going to do nothing. But with 4 little kids, that just wasn't an option. And so, you know, we began to focus on these baby steps. One of the things that they were using their food stamps on was Kool-Aid. And so, you know, again, it was like, do we really need Kool-Aid or can we switch to water? One of them had a husband that was hooked on Mountain Dew. We went through the Mountain Dew ingredient list, and I highlighted how yellow number 5 is an artificial ingredient in a color, a dye that's linked to hyperactivity, in some cases cancer. There's brominated vegetable oil, which is an ingredient that is not used by the beverage industry in other countries, you know, and the more that he learned, we're smart. We are smart. I don't care where you are socioeconomically. When you learn this stuff, you don't want to eat it anymore. And they started to recognize that the money they were spending on Mountain Dew and Kool-Aid could start to go towards other things. And I realized that we have this opportunity as a country to take this illiteracy and restore illiteracy. And we aren't going to learn it overnight. You don't learn how to read overnight. And to have the kind of compassion to recognize that we're sort of all at this entry point, like a whole bunch of kindergartners learning how to read, that's where we are as a country. But we can teach each other and we can do this. And again, it's focusing on progress. And so I think if you look at going from 0 to 60, that can be really daunting and overwhelming, but if you realize that you can teach somebody, just like you teach a child how to ride a bike, how to get up and running, then they're conscious and they start to make conscious food choices and their health begins to change, and that's what we saw.
Also, let's not forget how powerful Los Angeles is as a communication center, because even things like writing into the script in a comedy, or writing in, you know, in a food series, not in a food series, a regular TV drama or movie, because this is how so often these kind of conversations get started. That somebody says, "Ew, what are you eating? Do you know how many chemicals are in that?" Right? No kidding, no kidding. So you writers out there, yeah. Somebody over here, and yes, and then in the back there.
Thank you, aloha. I just want to thank all of you so much. I'm so grateful to be here for this topic. And I've been on farms in the most unusual places, in New York, where I never thought I'd be on one, and I've seen kids that have ADHD that I've taken care of for other people. And they do these programs that I know are so possible for a community where we can get vouchers and sponsors and bring it into the public schools. When we say financially it's not possible, it is possible. And I know that because I've tried, and it can happen. It's baby steps, like what you're saying. And I just want to share a weird experience. I've been vegan for over 25 years, but there's so many, like my son, and so many kids out there and adults that are not. And I got dragged into a project, and I found out through this project that you're absolutely right. Food issues are definitely not Republican or Democrat or any partisan. I was helping some engineers in an educational process to find out, and this is a true story, that toxoplasma is a real parasite that cannot be killed unless chicken or meat is cooked all the way through inside. And they had created a product. And what I have found out through learning through these biomedical engineers, that there's medical evidence, and this is a true story. If you go to El Pollo Loco or any of those places, you're not going to be able to know if there's a parasite in your meat. You will not know if it has, an itty-bitty tiny parasite. True story is after tons of research from microbiologists and biomedical engineers, they have found evidence that toxoplasma is not only linked to neurological damages, it eats away at the neural cavity. Things like Parkinson's, we don't have an answer where it came from. And also it's been linked to schizophrenia. And undercooked meat is a very serious issue. I now found out, we have congressmen in both partisans. We have Mike Honda. We have U.S. Senator Dianne Feinstein, very concerned since 2009 about issues of undercooked meat. And I found out she even gives awards to little tiny restaurants in San Francisco when they see the achievements. So I really honor this issue very much.
Thank you very much. And I know a lot of people have questions. Real quick, I'm going to ask you, Aaron, or Stuart, if you have anything to add, and particularly, Aaron, anything from the perspective of food and business. Anything you want to add or say to that, or that comes up for you that you'd like to say?
Sure. I never wanted to really open a restaurant. I just wanted to provide an opportunity for people to see that you can have alternatives to supplement or to add to your diet. I'm not a proponent of everyone turning vegan or anything, but to have healthy alternatives out there that are organic, that taste great, and to see the population that comes in there and how grateful they are to have these options out there. So, I just wanted to be able to be part of that community that's growing. And I always say the planet is making us do this whether we want to or not, in far as waking up into what we're ingesting in our food, because it's just not possible to continue on the way we're compounding population, and we just don't have the land, we don't have the resources to support our current diet and the way we're going. So that's what's important for me.
Thank you. Stuart, do you have anything you want to add?
Always. I'm an obstetrician, and I was in residency in medical school when food was still food, and back in the 70s. And I remember 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency in obstetrics and gynecology, not one lecture on nutrition, not one lecture on breastfeeding. I think that somebody said earlier about educating, my generation may be a lost cause. I mean, we can certainly make changes, but the children are where the future is, and educating the children, and whether it's what the First Lady is doing with trying to get healthy food into the schools, or whether it is what Robyn is doing to try to bring the message to the younger generation who like with smoking, they sort of started to police their parents and get us to stop doing these things. And if we can, I don't want them to see brainwashing, but I'd like to see the children be educated in this sort of thing. I think that you can start with that. It may take a generation, but eventually Monsanto and those other companies will get the word. And the reason that it's so important to me right now as an obstetrician is because everything that Robyn was talking about with her children, it actually begins in utero. And it begins with the fetus, and the fetus is developing, and if you're taking yellow dye number 5 or whatever else you want to take in while you're pregnant, you have to realize that these things are crossing the placenta, and although the placenta is a great filter, we have no idea what that's really doing to the fetus. All the little neurons are forming, and all the little emotions that the mother puts out, or the experiences she has in life, can happen at times where these things are all forming. So autism, there's a lot of thought about autism beginning in the uterus. There's a lot of thought about allergies beginning in the uterus as a fetus. And families that have never had babies with autism or allergies in them before are giving birth to babies who now develop them in young childhood. So, I came here today not knowing a whole lot about Robyn or what she does, and I'm just wowed by what you I've been motivated. I take Marianne's words to heart when she says, if not, what was it again? How does it go? Who are you not to do this? So I fortunately have evolved in my practice where I am now doing home birthing, and I'm doing, the midwifery model of care, and it's been enlightening for me, but I am the 1%. Thank you. I'm the 1% that is doing this, but the wave is coming. People are understanding that the kind of care they're getting in hospital birthing isn't right, and that's been a generation or two of women who sort of believe that they've lost their own bodies. Their bodies don't know how to take care of a pregnancy, and they only with modern medicine can we give birth these days. And the same things happened with food, and so I've become a passionate supporter of Marianne's, and now I'm a passionate supporter for Robyn's. I don't know what I can do, but I've never been so wowed by your presentation. It was absolutely amazing, and I'm going to bring that to all of my individual clients, one person at a time.
Francis?
And the people who ask me, why are, you can't hear me?
No, we need a microphone, honey.
Okay. Why do you spend so much money on organic food? I say I would rather spend my money on organic food now than pay my hospital bills later. And the other thing, because Marianne brought it up, I just did a movie a couple of weeks ago for Hallmark called Art and Soul, where my granddaughter says, "Hey, Daddy, do you want a grilled cheese sandwich?" And I got them to change the line to, "Hey, Daddy, do you want an organic, gluten-free, dairy-free grilled cheese sandwich?" So it's possible.
Okay, we need you to go really quickly now. I need you to all just ask your question real quick, get to the chase, and we'll try to get to the chase real quickly too.
Really quick. Just wondering about the argument, the GMO argument, sorry to be naive about it, but when they say that they can't feed the population without using GMOs.
Again, that is brilliant PR spin if you're a chemical company trying to sell chemicals. So again, I wanted to see the data because I'm a bit of a data wonk. The USDA reports that we throw away between 30 and 40% of the food that's produced in this country. The United Nations reports the same thing. So do we have a problem with production, or do we have a problem with distribution? We have a problem with distribution. And it's not one size fits all. There was a special report out of the UN that basically said, maybe, maybe not. We don't know if this technology is going to work as it's told. We've got these two versions. One's Roundup Ready, the other's going to make its own pesticide. Those two versions right now, we're quickly realizing, aren't doing what they promised. And the UN is really emphasizing how important it is that we tap into the knowledge base, the resources, the technology, especially the wisdom in the farmers, to figure out how to create a food system. But we have got a major waste problem.
We have 17,000 children who starve every day on this planet. But the problem, as Robyn is saying, is not a dearth of food. It's a lack in our consciousness. It's a lack in our conscience. And when we buy into the propaganda of things like Monsanto talking about how they need the GMOs to feed the world's hungry, it's a lack of analysis on our part and sophisticated, intelligent thinking. And then the next step is to take what we know, once we do figure it out, and turn it into real force. And that's what I think is also part of what happens when you're doing a political campaign. What you're trying to do is put a political container of real force behind this. Because I do think, because of people like Robyn, we have now a critical mass of people in this country who are waking up, not just about food either, because the food awakening is part of a larger awakening, isn't it? And now it's the issue of now we need to convert this into that which will actually provide that new operating system that Robyn was talking about, not just in terms of food, but in terms of the whole society. Okay, yes.
Why isn't anyone talking about the inequality that is being instilled by these companies and
I don't know who has a microphone.
We have a new free trade agreement being signed right now by the Democrats, which is called the Pacific Rim Free Trade Agreement, which proposes exactly the furthering of these type of policies that are detrimental to the population, to America's health, and people who are basically eating the food that we are exporting that is infected with colorants and pesticides and cancer, carcinogenic.
Well,
why isn't anybody pinning it
Well, I
like
don't know
it's
why you're saying-
inequality? It's inequality. It's a terrible inequality.
I don't really know why you're saying, why isn't anybody talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Because I think a lot of people are talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
That's it.
We certainly talk about it quite a bit in the
Block
campaign.
it. We should start blocking it because this
Well,
promotes
absolutely.
the same principles that we are denigrating here.
And a lot of people are trying to block it throughout the country, and I'm sure Robyn would
And
agree
again,
with
I
me
think
on
it's
that.
this particular issue highlights again the need to figure out these new operating systems, because technically it is the fiduciary duty, which means it is their obligation, their financial obligation as executives of these companies to drive shareholder return, period. That is by law what they have been hired to do. They're not hired to care about the environment. They're not hired to care about the health of the consumer. They are hired to care about the health of that shareholder and that shareholder return. And so they are legally executing on that legal obligation to try to ensure those returns, which is why you start to see legislation that's written in favor of corporations in the chemical industry. It's not the first time we've seen this. Our grandparents went through this same thing with the tobacco industry. And we had this 50-year period of he said, she said science, where industry funded one side, we had independent science saying the other. The advantage we've got this time is we have got technology and we have got social media and we have got the internet that brings immediate transparency to issues. And I think this is truly, it's one of those issues, it's sort of a Hail Mary pass. They're trying to like sort of capture this whole thing at a global level. Consumers are waking up, countries are waking up, and again, this is a human rights issue. This is not just an American issue. This is a global human rights issue, and the more that we can connect and find the courage to use our voices, we will create the change, and we can create it very quickly.
Now, Robyn, with what you were just saying, yes, it is the fiduciary responsibility within the context of the corporation, but once again, that's why corporations should not run the world. Because even though it is the fiduciary responsibility within the corporate system to just increase the profit, just know even that is only the kind of fundamental law that it is within American capitalism, not within all capitalism. There are countries, capitalist societies, which build in much more of a factor of social responsibility even to corporations. And there was a time even in this country where in order to get a corporate charter, you were held accountable, and some people believe that every 5 years the American corporation should as well. So even when you say it is their fiduciary responsibility, we shouldn't have so much false respect for the fact that it is their fiduciary responsibility, because even within a corporate structure, and as someone who owns stock, as most of us do, there is such a thing as blood money.
Well,
and there is such a thing as healthy shame.
And I think a great example of that is, again, just because we've inherited this definition of what fiduciary responsibility means today, doesn't mean that we can't expand that definition to say your fiduciary duty as executive is to ensure the health of that consumer, so that the consumer actually lives long enough to be able to buy your products for a lifetime. And California actually led the way with a piece of legislation to broaden the definition of fiduciary responsibility so that an executive could say, you know what, I am going to make this decision mindful of the environment or mindful of consumer health. And so again, it's like, just because we've inherited these certain rules or definitions or standards does not mean they have to be the ones that we embrace going forward. And it's going to take unbridled creativity and intellect and passion, and give yourself permission to do that.
Yeah, we shouldn't have such false respect for that line, fiduciary responsibility. There is ethical responsibility. There is social responsibility. There is moral responsibility. There is human responsibility. Yes. Yes, back there.
Robyn, this is to you. First of all, thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing this awareness to the consciousness of the people in our own city streets. Have you heard about neem? Neem is a natural thing that grows like in India, and it is a pesticide that only kills the pests, and it lets the food grow, and it re-mineralizes to make biodynamic organic soil. and they're using that, and you could grow it in probably climates that like Mexico and India and that kind of stuff, and even in maybe Hawaii, and then you have no pesticides and no problem, and it's a natural, organic thing that God made.
Oh, and there's so many solutions that are out there. I mean, here in the United States, there's this extraordinary company. He was trained by Monsanto in 1985. He saw that it presented enormous risk. He couldn't go that route. His sister wrote the genetic code for the genetically engineered soybean. He took what he had learned, and he figured out a way to develop and enhance yields without using genetic engineering. His company is one of the most widely sought after in Asia, Korea, around the world. And again, I thought, here's this guy out of Iowa. Why aren't we leveraging this technology here? And there are. That's what the UN report.
What's the name?
It's called World Food Processing, and they are literally figuring out ways to engineer and design these smarter food systems without the genetically engineered products and without all the pesticides and toxic chemicals that could cause harm. And so again, it's like, first, you kind of have to acknowledge that there's a problem, and I think that's really where we are today. And then you've got this wide open opportunity to create these solutions, and exactly like what you're saying. And I think what we're starting to realize is the arrogance that was in this company to think that they could impose a handful of products on a global population and all of these different geographic areas and all of these different climates. It's arrogance. There's no way that you could have one size fits all for farming.
What can we, the people of Earth, do to bridge that solution to our problem, which is Monsanto, through Marianne?
You know, one of the things I would say is absolutely we've got to get behind members of Congress who are going to help lead internally, help create this change, create congressional hearings. Absolutely, we need to have a congressional hearing.
On GMOs. Congressional hearings on GMOs. Keep it in your mind. That's our goal. With Robyn speaking.
But I think in the meantime, you know, there are a lot of these corporations, they feel it internally. Their healthcare costs are getting hammered. They want to do the right thing. You've got a lot of companies out here like Facebook or Google, these different companies in California. Figure out a way to bring them in as a partner. They've got the resources. Again, none of us can do everything. All of us can do something. A lot of these big companies have the finances we need to help fund, you know, garden to table programs in schools so that kids can start to learn about this. Food economics. This concept of what you eat is going to impact our economy, our healthcare system, our family, our corporations, our competitiveness in the global marketplace. That is a fundamental core American value that should be taught to our children.
What's your thought? What happened to Bill? What's with Bill Gates? What do you think?
So Bill Gates likes operating systems. And he sees in Monsanto, the Gates Foundation is a large shareholder of Monsanto, and it's an operating system. The Gates Foundation, yeah. And I think, you know, again, a lot of these guys sort of hedge. He has hedged. He's invested a ton in Monsanto as an operating system. Again, you know, I think there's a mindset there, just as there was a mindset with Microsoft. Microsoft was able to execute a business model that created a monopoly on an operating system in the United States. As I studied that operating system, I realized that Microsoft's operating system, because of the monopoly that it created, was not allowed in the same way in Europe. Europe did a much better job of saying, you know what, monopolies are not in the best interest of anybody. And so they really kind of restricted what Microsoft was able to do. So he has incredible expertise and insight on how to introduce an operating system, which is probably why there are such close ties with Monsanto. There are Monsanto VPs that are on the board of the Gates Foundation. But I think, too, you know, he also has hedged because he also recognizes that this train has left the station and that there is a trend here that's happening that's not a fad. The consumer is waking up. So at the same time, he's got this investment, and this is kind of the stage we're in right now. At the same time, he's got an investment in Monsanto, just like a lot of the Wall Street portfolio managers do. He's also starting to invest in these smaller startups that are creating extraordinary change, that are using clean ingredients and better for you products. So he's in a place right now where he's hedged. These are very brilliant businessmen, and they'll get out of the money. Again, I think when they recognize that the opportunity has been lost, it's up to us to create that noise and to create that movement in the marketplace. And again, I think the most effective place we can create those changes is getting to companies like Nestle or General Mills. They're already contacting the farmers right now, trying to figure out what it would cost to convert their supply chain. So we just need to churn up that volume a little bit more.
This gentleman has had his, where is the microphone right now?
It's right here.
Okay, real quickly, this gentleman, and then just real quickly through all these hands.
First of all, I think I want to
say what a super job Robyn did. In fact, I would recommend if you can put it on a CD, I think it can be really promoted.
I just gave another TED Talk, and it's similar. I mean, it's very similar. I just gave it last week, so it's about to go online, hopefully in a couple of weeks. The last time I gave a TED Talk, they did ban the subject, and I kind of figured if they ban,
me too.
if they ban, they did. If they ban this new food economy and what we're trying to do to create economic opportunity in the United States, we are hosts. So I got my fingers crossed they won't ban this one, and I tried to present it in a way so that they wouldn't.
I really want you to hear what she just said. Her TED Talk was banned. So you know the whole thing about TED and fresh, free ideas? Her TED Talk was banned.
Yeah, it was, you know, when they issued a memo, they said, you know, these are red flag topics is what they called it. Anybody that talked about food as health was considered a red flag topic. Anybody that brought up GMOs was considered a red flag topic. And I joked with a friend, I didn't know if it was ideas worth spreading or ideas worth censoring. But, you know, I mean, again, for me with the finances, I always go to who's funding this? And it was at the time, it was DuPont and Coca-Cola.
Can I add something? I'm 85, and I started Organic Vegan 11 months ago in July. The old story, you are what you eat, it's proven itself. I've gotten rid of 95% of all my pains, and people think I'm anywhere from 10 to 20 years younger. And there's a story that I could tell, but on the internet under my daughter's name, Dara Dubinet, and she has over 37,000 people who follow her, and she's teaching people what to eat, as well as detoxifying their home and their body.
If you want to boycott something and get something passed, boycott the media. That's who you need to boycott. Any broadcast news in this nation, if you want news, take it from PBS. Any other news that you see, 60 Minutes, anything, just boycott it. Don't listen to it. It's not the news.
Ladies and gentlemen, I need to make an announcement, actually. This conversation is great, and I don't want to stop it or suppress it. And I certainly agree. You are incredible. I'm your biggest fan. I'm sure you will forgive me and you understand. I, however, just me though, I have to run because I have to be in Malibu at another talk where I am already late. So if it's okay, and it's okay with you guys, I'm going to just kind of slip out. Mia, could you come up here and then you could moderate this? And is there anybody who has one last thing for me by any chance before I leave? Yes.
In Vermont, they already passed GMO labeling, and they're not going to enact it until 2016. One big problem, Monsanto is suing.
Right, I know. Who was telling me about this the other day?
That's big.
Somebody was telling me about this. So let me say before I leave, I'm totally hip to the governmental issues. I believe it's both and, Robyn, I personally. When you were talking about working with these companies, I totally agree with you. I feel it is a both and I feel we're all called to sort of the part that we can play. I don't need to tell anybody here. I hope that for the sake of these issues, as well as others, I certainly hope that you will do everything that you possibly can in the next 5 days to help get the vote out so that we can be, right? Thank you. We need to be one of the top 2 vote getters on next Tuesday. If only the traditional voters vote, we will not be one of the top 2. If those of us interested more fundamentally in subjects like this do vote, then we will be one of the top 2 vote getters. And you know how I stand on this issue, and that I would very much be vocal, be robust, be passionate, and have Robyn on speed dial to whatever extent she would allow if I have the honor and the privilege. Please continue with this conversation until it has its natural denouement. I know you won't take advantage of Robyn and get her stay too long, but for another few minutes, whatever you moderate up here. I love you, I thank you, and to you, Robyn, thank you so much.
I just wanted to say something to Robyn.
Thank you, Marianne. Hi, everyone. I'm Mia Rue Robbins. I'm one of the hosts of this event, and I just wanted to introduce myself so you know who I am. I'm a non-practicing midwife, a mother of 5, and I'm very passionate about this topic and everything that's been said. And I just wanted to say one thing to the gentleman who asked the question about being able to eat on low income. I used to work on the border of Mexico in a clinic serving 95% Spanish-only speaking women who came to us generally because they did not even have access to health care. And my client base there also had very little access to resources for buying food. And so one of my challenges was really helping those families to eat healthy and to gestate healthy fetuses, right? And it is absolutely possible. You know, it's a simple diet. I also lived in South America. I lived in Brazil, and I worked with populations in the Amazon rainforest basin. And, you know, those people live generally to about 100 years old. They are extremely impoverished by monetary standards, but very rich in heart. And they have access to small plots of land where a lot of them grow their own food. And they eat a very simple diet. They eat rice and beans. They eat, you know, yucca root, manioc root. They eat vegetables, fresh vegetables, lots of fresh fruit, whole grains. And, you know, they might have a cow, or they might have, you know, a few families that have a cow or a couple goats, and they have some milk, and they have some chickens, and they have some eggs. And it's a very simple diet. And they live a very long life. They're not obese. They glow. Their skin is beautiful. They have bright eyes. They have big smiles. Sometimes they don't have a lot of teeth, but, you know, but they're happy people. And yes, you can absolutely eat a healthy diet in this country on a low income. I believe in it.
Hi, thank you so much. This is just so amazing. I'm going to try not to cry. I would love to know a little more about divesting, especially in terms of stocks and retirement plans and all the, you know, the places where Monsanto and other companies get a lot of their money. Does that make sense?
So I was an equity analyst on a team that managed $20 billion in assets, and I came out of business school ready to go. You know, I learned all these hard skills, and I can remember sitting at the desk one day and like crunching all these numbers and doing all this analysis, and one of the guys was like, "Don't worry about it." I was like, "What do you mean, don't worry about it? Like, how can you buy this stock if you haven't done the analysis?" And he said, "Well, all of our competitor funds are going to be buying it, so we're going to be buying it." And I realized that the game was a competitive game between the funds, and that we were buying and holding companies because of the competitive race with these other products. And so they're not even thinking about necessarily the ethics behind the business model. And when they decide to dump Monsanto, it will be because something went down internally in that company. And I think a great example of how that can take out a company is Enron. Their core business started to erode, and so they began to fabricate and prop up their earnings with a lot of derivative contracts and paper contracts. They had a lot of fancy names for pieces of paper that they said were creating earnings. The same thing is happening in the commodity market right now. People are figuring out how to create these paper contracts around the commodities. That's going to prop up earnings until somebody figures it out. And when somebody does, every single one of those portfolios will dump that stock. So we will see what happened to Enron, I think happened to some of these companies. I think we've got to keep the pressure on, because the reason that a company like Enron began to fabricate their earnings was they felt so much pressure to have to continue that growth and meet those earnings numbers. So I think that's why this consumer movement is so important, to create that kind of pressure on these companies. And you either do the right thing or you go down.
Can you teach us how to do it?
Sorry, say it.
It's
I think they're already seeing it. You know, I think what we've just seen at McDonald's shareholder meeting, they had one of the largest demonstrations ever at at McDonald's shareholder meeting. And, you know, a lot of that was around the fact that they're around living wages and the prices that they're paying to their employees. For the first time, they had to literally shut down the headquarters. They sent all of their executives home early that day. That kind of demonstration is not something you can do from your laptop. I think it requires that we show up. And showing up takes a lot of courage. And I had all these excuses as to why I couldn't show up. When I started this, my kids were 1, 3, 4, and 5. I had 4 little excuses. And somebody said you should meet with your local member of Congress, and all I kept thinking was, I am not that mom. Like, I'm not that mom. And then I thought, you know, how in the world am I going to communicate this issue? I did a little bit of background research on him. He had family members that had cancer. Got into his office, and I sort of had this image of this like big mahogany desk being totally intimidating and daunting, and thinking like, who am I to go into this big office? And it was this office that was packed full of these 20-something-year-old kids that were super passionate about all of these issues, and I realized it was actually much more accessible than I thought. And they shared that when a consumer actually takes the time to either write a letter or call a member of Congress or go into their office, they recognize that that demonstrates dozens, if not hundreds of other constituents that would move on the same thing. So that's one of the things I would really emphasize is have the courage to show up. You know, come with your facts in hand. Wow them with those numbers, knock them out with the numbers. And you've got to remember that there really is not a family in the country that's not impacted at this point by these conditions and diseases.
How do you change legislation to avoid the free trade agreement to pass? That's hanging in the balance right now.
I mean, to change legislation, you have to create an awareness. You know, education is absolutely critical for any of these issues. So again, you know, if you have a friend that you can start a book club with, start a movie night, start something at your children's school, start something in your workplace, you know, pick a Friday where you guys have a, you know, garden to table meal. Begin the conversation, and don't be afraid to begin the conversation. And I think it's education will wash out these injustices.
Robyn, I've been writing books on nutrition for 15 years, advocating eating organic. So I honor the work you're doing. But I just would like to point out that if you get your eggs organic, and you get your milk organic, and you get your meat organic, it'll still kill you. Because the science tells us very clearly that human beings, like our primate cousins, are primarily herbivores. So the goal should not be organic animal agriculture. The goal should be to end animal agriculture.
When someone first suggested that to me, you know, I grew up in Texas eating meat with every meal and snack, you know, and then when I was in college, the zone diet where you're supposed to like load on meat protein, you know, and I thought, eat less meat, like I'm either gonna be hungry or fat, you know, that was how conditioned I had been on this meat diet. It felt really radical at the time to dial back from meat, but as we were starting to make a shift as a family, or how are we gonna afford more organic food, I realized that meat was a huge part of our family budget. And as we began to back away from meat consumption and put it more towards the plant-based diet, it was astonishing what happened. And the health of one of my boys had suffered for 5 years, and I had not identified it as being linked to a dairy issue. And again, when we started to really dig into that research and read books like the China study, you know, to figure out what was happening, and again, how we had been so conditioned by these messages in the media to eat a certain way and to consume a certain way. And you really can afford a lot more than you think you can afford if you start to make these shifts away from a meat-dominant diet. And it was fascinating to really, I had to unlearn first what I had learned growing up in Texas. And then I sort of had to reprogram, I had to reintroduce what I was learning about food and realizing that all of these plants actually had a ton of protein in them too. I was invited a couple of years ago to debate the National Cattlemen's Association. I had been behind a lot of the work that was on pink slime. And I was contacted by CNBC, a pretty conservative show, and they said, you know, you understand, you can speak to our viewers on this issue. Would you come on the show and talk about pink slime? And I worked my tail off. And we were in Texas with my family for a few days, and I was trying to really unplug to be with my family for those few days, and I said no. And the guy kept calling back, and he said, Robyn, you've got to come on. You're the only one that can talk about this. Will you please come on and debate the National Cattlemen's Association? And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that's the group that took down Oprah, you know? And I'm looking at my husband, and he, of course, is like, yeah, go for it, you know? And so I grabbed one of my mom's jackets, and I'm fine, you know, it's why I'm here. I know this is why I'm here. I show up in this studio 10 minutes before we were supposed to go live on the air. I get a call from the producer, and he said, I don't know what to say. This is not how we do business. The National Cattlemen's Association won't be on the show. And I said, did you specifically tell them that it was me? And he said, yes, we did. And my first reaction to that was, how in the world is a mom in Iowa or a mom in Missouri or somewhere that's not on one of these coasts going to learn this if we can't have this dialogue? If Kraft and Burger King were so threatened by an internet little online TV show, and the National Cattlemen's Association is doing this with CNBC, it is absolutely up to us to communicate what you know, to continue to educate moms. The fact that this is not taught, I think, you know, as a mother of 4 that ate all of this stuff that he's talking about, I didn't know. It's partly why I do what I do. And I think, you know, as mothers we're told to avoid alcohol, or we're told to eat, you know, less of these certain things. If you were simply told to go on an organic diet, maybe just for those 12 weeks, if that's all you could afford, we would do it. We do it in a heartbeat. And when we start to recognize that that is a human right, a fundamental human right that should be afforded any American, and especially a pregnant mom that is consciously already choosing what she's putting into her body, that again is something I think that it speaks to all of us. It speaks to the talent of all of us. Your ability to write the books about nutrition, his ability to reach these patients at that vulnerable stage. None of us can do everything, but all of us can do something, and it's absolutely what this is going to require.
Hi, Robyn. First, thank you very much for your presentation. It was amazing and eye-opening, and I thought I was awake, but now I feel really wide awake, so thank you for that. My question is about what you talked about midway through your presentation about, if I understood correctly, 1% of the farmland is organic?
Yeah, it's, I mean, again, it's crazy. If you look at the growth of organic food and you look at the fact that Walmart has entered the category, Kroger, there was recently an earnings report that said 70% of Kroger shoppers are now buying natural or organic at least some percent of the time. Kroger represents like 1/3 of the grocery category. So the demand is absolutely here, but we're outsourcing that opportunity to China or to Romania, which is nuts. And we're not only doing it for the organic produce, but, you know, one of the huge issues that a lot of the companies are facing right now is how do they feed the animals? For the people, you know, this crazy animal consumption thing that we got kicked off onto with the media, got beef campaign, got milk campaign, everything that we were brainwashed with as kids. Those animals are what they eat too. And they're being pumped full of a whole bunch of genetically engineered corn that's regulated by the EPA as a pesticide. 80% of the antibiotics that are used in this country are pumped into the animals that we eat. So the animals are sick too. So we're eating sick animals if we choose to eat animals. And I think, you know, when I was meeting with some of these companies to figure out where are they sourcing, you know, the animal feed, as they try to shift to non-GMO, the primary source for that is Romania. And again, I was like, this is nuts. Why not create this opportunity for American farmers? Yeah.
We practice permaculture, which is organic culture. We don't use, only sometimes the peasants use excrements, to enrich the soil. And but they practice permaculture, which is not the American style agriculture. It's actually highly organic and real integrated with the ecology and the ecosystem of my country, which is still a pristine country because we had a dictatorship for 30 years, and we kicked them out, and now we have the Americans coming in with their regulation and stupid laws.
You know, I think an important thing to remember is that we're on the same side as the farmers. You know, and I think in the early years of this, they did a really good job of creating it as almost like an antagonistic relationship. And when I went out to Iowa, I realized we were all on the same team. I was invited to speak at a biotech conference and to debate Monsanto. The children were little, and I got up super early and packed 4 lunches and got on this flight to Chicago. I land, the guy says, they won't come. They didn't show up. You know, and I'm thinking, I've just left my husband, I've just left my children. And I walk into this room, and this guy goes, you don't look like a hippie. And I was told I had an hour and a half to entertain some angry farmers, you know. And I got in front of them and I talked about this double standard, how Kraft formulates their product differently for eaters in other countries, and how that affects all of our kids, not just their kids, not just mine, but all of ours. And that these opportunities were being missed for the American farmers. It was in the early years of this work, I want to say probably around 2008 maybe, the Department of Justice was doing an antitrust investigation actually into Monsanto to see if there were monopolistic practices being employed against the farmers. And this one farmer at the end of the talk, and he was big time, big ag, he raised his hand and his voice shook. And he said, what do you want us to do? And I said, when the Department of Justice comes, you have to tell the truth. You have to be brave enough to tell the truth. And they need us fighting for them too. They need us fighting for them too. They don't have a way out right now. Part of the problem is that the financial structure of farmers, those loans come from companies like Monsanto. So they're on the hook before they've even put a seed in the ground. So again, the opportunity in front of us is how do we create a financial structure for these farmers? How can we set up a loan system for these farmers? There are so many opportunities, business and economic opportunities to create a better system.
Thank you, Robyn. I wanted to comment about ways that people can help. Because showing up obviously is really important. But also, you can do a lot from your computer, because when you post on the social media sites for your congressmen and your senators, when you make phone calls to them, and when you send them letters, even when you sign petitions, if you add a little bit of a personal note, all of these have an effect on the way they vote. And I know Dennis Kucinich, that was at a prior one of these forums where we also talked about GMOs, and he said, you know, it's really important that we add that little personal note, and votes have been swayed just by phone calls, enough phone calls being made. And they realize that for every phone call and for every letter and for every social media posting, that represents a lot more people. So we really need to do that, and we really need to solicit our friends to do that as well.
And I want to add something about supporting the farmers that you said that hasn't been mentioned yet, but I think is really important, and as a mother is an amazing way to educate our kids, which is to get involved with local farms. You know, a lot of the local farms offer CSAs, which is like community sustained agriculture, and for such a nominal fee, you can get a weekly box of organic vegetables delivered to your house. You know, and if you pick a CSA that's local, I know at least 10 in this vicinity. And if you have kids, or even if you have friends who have kids, plan a play date to go to the farm and show the kids where the food comes from. And like, don't make the bugs the evil little creatures. They're there doing their jobs. It's enchanting. You know, these are real vegetables because they have bugs on them. You know, it's cool. And so I just wanted to I really like supporting farmers too.
Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom. I'm a registered dietitian. I'm from upstate New York, and up until January I was teaching to families on food stamps about nutrition education until, unfortunately, through cuts in the Farm Bill, I lost my job. the silver lining was I ended up in California and have joined Marianne's campaign, but I'm still connected to this group of professionals who, unfortunately, at every annual meeting, we have huge, booths by all of the major corporations, and it seems to me that within the organization, we're still outnumbered by the old guard who thinks in these old ways, and I'm wondering what kind of recommendations you would have to begin that shift within the largest group of nutrition professionals.
You know, it reminds me, the first TEDx talk I gave was viewed by the food industry. I mean, I knew it would be. And I heard from a CEO inside one of these huge food companies. And he said, could you come and speak to my employees? You can say things I cannot say. And I flew out there, and people are like, you're crazy. Why are you even bothering? They're just this big food company. And there was something really human in him when he asked. I flew out there and, we're making these gourmet versions of this absolute junky, horrible food that they sell. But we're making it with fresh vegetables, and it was beautiful. It was in this gourmet kitchen. And it was obvious that he obviously was so in love with his children. He had these 3 little boys, and he was so in love with the food industry. He'd been doing it for 20 years. And he was so in love with his company and these employees he was so proud of. And I turned to him and I said, what are you afraid of? And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, my board of directors. And that's when I realized that we had to create the political cover for these CEOs too, and I would think it would be the same inside any of these organizations or industries where you have that old guard. They're disconnected. And anybody under a certain age, we see it. We see it in the health of our friends. We see it in the health of our families. You can't give up on that education, and at some point that aha moment's gonna hit for these old guards. But it's to recognize that it doesn't matter what the industry is, we're all feeling that, at these levels. And to continue to think about it as a campaign and how do we create the political cover that give these executives what they need to make the change.
So what might that look like? Can you give an example?
I think a great example is of what you guys are doing in California there too. This particular CEO, when the labeling failed, for GMO labeling, I said, you've got 6 million people in California that are telling you they want this labeled. These companies are not going to label these ingredients. That would introduce traceability, accountability, and liability should it cause harm. There's no way, as an executive, you would want to introduce that kind of liability. So the smarter choice for them is to dump it and opt out and switch to non-GMO ingredients, which is what they're feeling out right now. And I think, it's to create that kind of groundswell and that kind of movement. You guys did it again when you decided that the caramel coloring that was being used in Coke and Pepsi, because of the concern about its link to cancer, you guys wanted it dumped out of Coke and Pepsi here in California, while the rest of the United States, I guess it didn't matter if we lived in Colorado, we weren't worth as much as you guys in California. But to see that kind of movement, that can create the change. And again, it gets back to this earlier question. I think the fastest way to create change is through the marketplace. And then we have to have these members of Congress that can lead us there too.
Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take just 1 or 2 more questions, and then we'll have some closing remarks. You and you, sir? Yes. Can we get a microphone? Thanks.
Hi, Desiree. Thank you guys so much for being here today. This is amazing. I'm really impressed by the information that you've put out. You probably are familiar with an article that was written that is called "This Is Not Farming." Perhaps you may have read that. Are you familiar with that one? It was an article, it was a very personal article about a woman who was pretty much trying to back the Environmental Protection Agency up with some sort of manifestation so that they could actually take some action against the farm factoring of the cattle. And she goes through about how people were literally giving up their homes because they could not sell the homes because of the fumes from all the urine, and essentially of how it had just decimated the entire state. And so I was just wanting to see if everybody could maybe just look up that article, "This Is Not Farming," and also about a social media way that you can step up. There was a young girl, she questioned, like you were mentioning, the brominated vegetable oil, the BVO is what it's called, and it was a young girl who just questioned, why are they adding BVO to Gatorade when this is supposed to be a health drink? And she was able to get a petition going, and within a miraculously short period of time, she was able to knock it out of their entire formula. So this is just an example about how we can pick one thing that we're adamant about and how we can make a difference.
Someone brought up the comments that there is pending whether a new generation of genetically engineered crops tolerant of Agent Orange herbicide 2,4-D, which always has dioxin contaminants, in combination with another herbicide, will be. Thank you. Yeah, so Dow AgroSciences want, and it's pending at the USDA and EPA, they want a new generation of genetically engineered crops tolerant of Agent Orange component 2,4-D, which always contains dioxin contaminants in the manufacturing process, and about half the time contain one of the two deadliest dioxin contaminants. And what's your opinion, and what do you think there's any chance of, I guess, some see it as the crisis of vegetation management. The broad spectrum herbicide Roundup isn't working anymore. Got to go to anyway, the 2,4-D inhibits broadleaf growth, and then they have another herbicide to inhibit narrow vegetative growth, but it's quite a threat, especially to, and especially the obstetrician. Do you know about phenoxyherbicides and reproductive problems, teratogenic and phytotoxic effects? So please comment.
So when that was first being introduced, and you have to remember the reason they're introducing it is because they made all these forward-looking statements to shareholders that this Roundup Ready stuff was going to work, and it didn't work. And suddenly over half of the states are reporting what they call super weeds, because these Roundup Ready crops were supposed to, help control these weeds, and all of a sudden they've got not just weeds, but super weeds that are now intolerant to the spraying of this chemical Roundup. So what do? Instead of saying, okay, let's retreat a little bit here, let's pull these genetically engineered crops, let's get back to a sustainable system. No, instead it's all guns, and instead of going for Roundup, let's supersize this. And let's go to this 2,4-D, and let's go to this industrial strength chemical application to try to knock out these weeds. And when people first started making that comparison to how it contained these components of Agent Orange, my parents met in Vietnam. My dad was in the US Army, and my mom was a nurse with Save the Children. And I grew up with picture books of her photographs with these little children that were maimed and disfigured and everything that had happened. And I thought, why? Even if it's a component, even if they say that you're exaggerating to say that it's Agent Orange or some kind of component, why are we going to such an industrial toxic level with our food? And why are we not telling anyone about this? And I think, again, this technology has been introduced by chemical companies to sell their chemicals, period. It's not a sustainable business model for the 21st century. And we have to think about how can we collapse that. It's through the marketplace, it's through consumer education. And so, my advice is this can be crazy hard to hear. I ate this food through all 4 of my pregnancies, and I rejected anybody that tried to tell me about this. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want the guilt. I didn't want the blame. And yet at the same time, it wasn't until that little girl got hurt and had that allergic reaction that that point, that vulnerability, everything around me, that facade I had constructed collapsed. And that's happening around the country. And so I think you have to invite people to go to that place. Who do you love who's been impacted by cancer or autism or allergies? Do you know somebody that has cancer or autism or allergies? Did you know that we've done this to the food? And get them to their heart as fast as you can. Get them to feel as fast as you can. And then you make them realize that this has happened to all of us. It's happened to all of us, and it is going to take all of us to fix it.
Hi. I can't speak to the specific thing you're talking about. Many of you have far more knowledge on this subject than I am. I'm very impressed with the questions that have come across. But one of the things that's been striking me sitting here listening is the amazing parallels between what Robyn is talking about in the food industry and what I've been exposed to, what's happening in the American medical industry as well. For instance, you just talked about the pesticides, and they don't pull back, they go forward. Same thing happens with antibiotics. You know, instead of backing off and using antibiotics, what they've done is they overuse antibiotics, and then they select out superbacteria, which then they have to create new antibiotics or more potent antibiotics, which we don't even know what they're going to do. Rather than backing off and going more toward homeopathic remedies and alternatives, they're going forward in that way. And again, it's the money that drives all of this stuff, whether it's the pharmaceutical companies or whether it's the big hospital industry. I look at research, and I look at research when I was a medical student and resident and a young physician. I trusted the scientific research. I trusted what was in the Green Journal, which is the main journal and the gray journal of my profession. Now I look at these things extremely critically, and I look at who's funding it, what's the motivation, what's the ideology, because it's almost as if they say, here's our ideology, let's fund some research to prove our ideology, as opposed to the other way around. And I think probably, you know, I don't know what the answer is. The answer is enlightened consumerism and not buying into these things. When you see stuff on the headline of the New York Times about whether it's food or whether it's medicine, don't assume that it's correct. You have to look into these sorts of things. The data that I'm exposed to defies everything that I had to relearn everything, almost everything that I learned in medical school and residency to practice the way I do right now. And my colleagues are sort of either living with blinders or cognitive dissonance or whatever it is to continue a pattern of not acknowledging the fact that what they're doing has led to a 33% cesarean section rate, higher rates of autism, higher rates of allergies, medical costs that have gone through the roof. The average cost of pregnancy in this country to deliver vaginally is about $15,000, $18,000. The average cost of a cesarean section is $35,000. Why would any hospital want to lower its cesarean section rate? They're only going to get half as much money. So the money and the information, the parallels here are pretty amazing to me. I just know that when I'm done here, I'm going home and I'm going to dump out my pantry and my refrigerator and start over, okay? Because I've just learned so much.
Aaron, did you want to say anything before?
I just wanted to thank Robyn. I mean, to be up here with you is humbling, and I appreciate so much the humility in which you deliver your work, you know, as a really honest steward of this. And just to remind everybody that the immediate task at hand is to get Marianne through this first leg of the election. So we all can do this job together, as Robyn is saying, by really, really amping up all of our resources and contacts and communications to make sure people know to vote this Tuesday and where they're going to vote, and to let them know that really only an independent candidate is the one that's going to bring this issue to the foreground for all of us. So thank you so much, Robyn. Thank you, Mia, too.
And before I give you my thanks, Robyn, I also wanted to just mention one of the other hosts of this event was Ann Gentry of Real Food Daily, who provided the food for us. Unfortunately, they've already left, but I did want to acknowledge their generous contribution. They have been integral in this campaign as well. And of course, Robyn, it's such an honor to sit by your side, and you're such a role model for me. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate you. Thank you.
And can I treat you to dinner? Right up the street.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Let's support Marianne.